pledging allegiance to the flag. All right, and so the way we'll operate tonight is I'll read each of the warrant articles and ask the presenter, or typically the town manager, but there's also some presenters here this evening on a couple of the agenda items, to speak to the warrant article, and then open it up for questions or discussions with anybody here, it being a public hearing. Following the review of the public hearing, the review of the warrant articles, the committee will vote on their recommendations for each of the articles. All right. Article 1 is to see if the town will vote to hear and act on the reports of the Finance Committee or any other board or committee, or act in relation thereto. I can tell you that I don't believe that the Finance Committee will be generating a report for this special town meeting. Any questions? All right, Article 2, to see if the town will vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $1,394.86 for payment of prior fiscal year bills as follows. One to each his own design for $747.62, and the second one for KP Law for $647.24, for a total of $1,394.86. Mr. Sosbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a drastic improvement from the $25,000 placeholder I had in there about a week ago. As you can see, we've narrowed it down to 2 items from fiscal year 22. The first being to each his own design for $747. That was flowers for Memorial Day. The invoice was sent to the Legion in error, and then by the time it came around to the town side, we'd already closed out for the year. So
when you say flowers for Memorial Day, do you mean like wreaths for the monuments?
exactly, yes.
Okay.
Yep. Any questions on that one? Okay. And then the KP Law, it was a supplemental bill that was a second page that was missed by a previous admin, but KP Law pointed it out to us once again after we already closed out fiscal year 22.
All right. Any questions or comments? All right, we're going to move on to Article 3, capital purchase, to see if the town will vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $40,000 for broadcasting equipment upgrades and staff support in Town Hall, and to take any other action related thereto. And again, Mr. Solzback.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have about $17,000 budgeted for this purpose. Our broadcasting booth, which right over here, is in dire need of repairs, both for software, but hardware as well, physical infrastructure. Year over year, the town really hasn't done the best job of maintaining that asset, and so we have a lot of catching up to do. We've had a couple critical failures, most recently just before annual town meeting in May last year. We had one of our main broadcasting pieces of equipment go down, which is why we haven't been able to live stream over the internet for some time. That will repair that issue. It's also going to allow us to broadcast over Zoom, have remote participation, and to be able to broadcast that Zoom participation live as well. There are a couple other more minor program things, for example, $5,000 for the archiving and playing of videos, things like that, and it adds up pretty quickly. So this $40,000 is going to cover that one-time infusion of new broadcasting equipment, as well as some staff support to implement that new system and get it online. I'd say year over year, you wouldn't see an investment like this. This isn't typical. But I would like to make a point in future years of actually investing and keeping up on that asset so that we don't find ourselves in a situation again where we're dumping more than $50,000 in a year on equipment. We should have never let it get to that point.
So you're saying you have 17,000 plus this 40,000 for a total of 57,000?
Correct.
What is you said there's a new contract with Comcast. What is their annual contribution?
Sure, and that's a great question. So it's going to be about $40,000 on the capital side of things. That was another issue we had, is that the old Comcast agreement that we had in place had just a really, I guess, subpar capital funding mechanism in place, and Comcast kind of got off the hook easy for a long time. When we were renegotiating that last year, going into this year, we did up that considerably. We went back and forth several times, but part of the concern I had was that if we didn't get a good, strong Comcast agreement in place, that after this investment, we'd be right back where we were again 5 or 10 years later, because technology turns over quick. So that new Comcast agreement, and I appreciate you encouraging me to highlight that, that new Comcast agreement is going to ensure the community that's going to be invested in regularly in a sufficient amount.
Any questions? Any questions or comments about the $40,000? All right.
Oh, and I apologize, Mr. Chair. I should note that where that money's coming in, we're going to be using free cash in this instance. Typically, those funds would be earmarked in some capacity at an annual town meeting as part of the budget, but those funds are kind of coming in midstream. So we're using free cash for that purpose, and that first year payment is going to roll in and fall to free cash, kind of backfilling that amount.
Do you have the current free cash balance, top of your head?
Not exactly. I know it's between 1.7 and 1.8 million.
Dollars, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Is there a reason why, if with that, we wouldn't have used ARPA funds instead of using free cash?
You could. I guess the benefit to ARPA is that it has fewer restrictions. And so I think you'd be better served using free cash if you're going to bring it to the town meeting. You realistically, the answer is you could use either if you had a preference one way or another. But our recommendation at this time was just free cash, because that Comcast money is intended for this purpose. We just don't have access to it yet. So it will get replenished. But when that Comcast money comes in later, it's not going to replenish the ARPA. So that was kind of our reasoning.
What's our current balance in free cash?
About 1.7 and 1.8 million.
Yeah, we can probably afford this, huh?
Great. Any other questions or comments? All right. Article 4 is the general bylaw amendment. To see if the town will vote to amend the general bylaws of the town of Winchton as recommended by the Recreation Commission, Winchton Park, Community Park Committee, as shown below, with text to be inserted, underlined, and text to be deleted, to be crossed out. I'm not going to read through the article. Would entertain an explanation, though.
Sure, I'll give you the highlights. So basically what they're looking to do is combine or recombine the Recreation Commission and the Winchton Community Park Committee with a member sitting in the audience this evening. In doing so, they want to increase the membership for the Recreation Commission from 7 up to 9. And then it's also worth mentioning that they're looking to add the Parks and component back in, so it would be Parks and Recreation Commission, just because with the influx over the past couple years of new, grounds and parks and things like that, it would be nice to have some committee to provide some guidance to the DPW on how those are maintained, just to get some additional citizen input. I'd also highlight that it tweaked some language regarding student seats. So as it was, the article carved out 2 seats, but it was restrictive, and then it specifically called out Murdoch students or Winchendon Public School students. But the thinking was that there are student age citizens in Winchendon who may go to a non-Winchendon public school or who may go to a school choice outside, but still would want to provide that kind of student viewpoint to discussions regarding recreation opportunities in Winchendon. And those are the kind of major components of it. And the last thing that I would add, if you just turn the page over, is that it still does highlight that the commission would submit its budget annually to the town manager's office.
No, thanks for cleaning it up. Looks good.
Thank you for helping us avoid some landmines. It always helps to get extra eyes on these things.
Any questions on Article 4? All right. Moving on to Article 5, the Community Preservation Act. I'll read this one. To see if the town will accept Sections 3 to 7 inclusive of Chapter 44B of the General Laws, otherwise known as the Massachusetts Community Preservation Act, by approving a surcharge on real property for the purposes permitted by said act, including the acquisition, creation, and preservation of open space, the acquisition, preservation, rehabilitation of and restoration of historical resources, the acquisition, creation, preservation, rehabilitation, and restoration of land for recreational use, the acquisition, creation, preservation, and support of community housing, and the rehabilitation and restoration of such open space in community housing that is acquired or created as provided under said act. To determine the amount of such surcharge on real property as a percentage of the annual real estate tax levy against real property and the fiscal year in which such surcharge shall commence. To determine whether the town will accept any of the exemptions from such surcharge permitted under Section 3E of said act and to take any other action thereto. All right. I know there are some people here to speak to from the exploratory committee that would be speaking to the article. And I'd invite, yes, if we could come up and sit at one of the microphones. Right. Identify yourself and then the floor is yours.
My name is Amanda Phillips, and I'm a member of the...
Right into the mic, or we can't hear. Thank you.
My name is Amanda Phillips, and I am a member of the Community Preservation Act Exploratory Committee. I am also a housing administrator in town at the Winchendon Housing Authority, so that's kind of like my angle on it. And that's who I am, and I'm here to answer questions.
Mark Dorwart, and I'm also on the CPA Exploratory Committee.
Thank you, Mark. All right. Perhaps you could give us a little background. I know your committee's been working for 6, 7 months or better to prepare this article for the town. So I'll turn this over to you.
So the Community Preservation Act is a Massachusetts law that several communities in the state of Massachusetts have adopted, whereby you get a surcharge on a portion of your taxes, of your homeowner's taxes, for the value of your real estate in town. And that money goes into a pool, and then that money can be 100% matched by the state. So, and then it's only used for those 4 projects. And everything that it is spent on is voted at town meeting by the residents of the community.
So from a taxpayer's perspective, what's the impact of that, of the law? If, assuming that that it's passed.
So there's several exemptions. So the first $100,000 of the value of your property is exempt. so that's just taken off right away. If you're low income, you are exempt from this as well. And then it's all on the second page of the letter.
Do you mean more the benefits of it to the community? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, the impact on the tax.
Oh, I see, okay.
I mean, I understand the benefit.
Okay, okay. My-
And then there's a chart here that shows exactly what it has. If it's adopted at 3%, it tells you, you know, the first 100,000 is taken out of. So say you have a, so it would be a $300,000 property, your impact would be $80.40 a year at the 3%.
Now, the exemptions that you spoke to, those are exemptions that are specific to, in the law, specified in the law.
Yes,
Okay.
that we can adopt.
They're optional.
Optional?
Yeah.
Like the
We're-
first
We're
$100,000?
recommending they be adopted.
I guess my question would be, for instance, the first $100,000 is exempted. Is that something that the local community decides, or is that something that it applies to anybody, every town that adopts the CPA?
It's up to us whether we adopt it in that fashion or not. So I think it should be stated in the article and on the ballot when it's voted for.
I think what I'm getting at is there, if we get enough detail in the article that covers any of the exemptions that are available.
So this is like it's a confusing sticking point for me.
I
and
can't understand you, I'm sorry.
This is a confusing sticking point for myself and obviously a lot of other people. But the process is that you vote for this article to bring it to a vote at town meeting. Or, I mean, that will bring it to a ballot vote
Yeah.
when people can vote for it. And in my personal mind, I think we should present the town with a bylaw that lays this stuff out sooner than later, which was how the state started doing it in the early days of this thing, like 20 years ago. But they ran into some issues with that, and since then, they bring it to a vote, and then they write the bylaw after the vote, after it's brought to town meeting. So, I mean, in my mind, if we had the bylaw already written, then this wouldn't be a confusing issue. But we're not, the vote that you're talking about now is just whether to bring it to a ballot vote. It's not what to bring to a ballot vote, it's whether to bring the CPA to a ballot vote. And we're just gonna have to go on a leap of faith that our recommendations are followed at this point. When it's put on the ballot, like, there will be a bylaw written at that point.
Yeah, I did see the document that showed the sequence of adopting it.
Sure, if I could just add a little bit to that, and this was a recent addition that I got from,
I can't hear you.
my
Thank you.
apologies.
Old people here.
Yeah, I know, I always forget. So this was something that just came up last night with the Board of Selectmen meeting, and the question was that the warrant article language is fairly vague, and this actually came up with the Community Preservation Act Exploratory Committee meeting as well. So the recommendation from legal counsel and the recommendation from Stuart Sagnor, who's the executive director of the Community Preservation Commission on the state level, had recommended the language go in the way that it is, and that's the typical way that you would see it. But what came up specifically last night at the selectmen meeting, the question was raised, well, you know, where's that 3% fit into this? And some of the other pieces, like the $100,000 exemption and things like that. So it's going to be worked into the language of the motion. That's the way they prefer to do it. But the specific sticking point was that 3%, and the Board of Selectmen had really kind of expressed in so many words that they would like to see that 3% figure built into the article. So I've been going back and forth with legal counsel today, and I just officially got a determination late in the day that that 3% language can be included. They recommend against it because it's overly restrictive, and that if somebody wanted to amend that number on the floor, they couldn't. But if you don't put that number in the article, then somebody could motion, 2% if they thought that 3% wasn't going to fly. But I think in terms of the conversation that the exploratory committee has had, they've really leaned on that 3% figure because that's the threshold at which you would have the opportunity to potentially be matched at 100% funding by the state. And
If
so
I could talk to that,
I would like to hear Mr. Saltzbeck finish,
Well-
please. Go ahead.
well, I'll wrap up this thought and I'm going to toss it over to you about that.
we have
that
been
one
exploring
point.
this for 8 months or a year
Right.
almost, so.
So the long and short of it is, we can include that. They recommended that this go forward for the public hearing, and that the selectmen can amend that on Monday, and it's not a significant enough of a change that would invalidate the hearing you're having this evening. So I just wanted to make the body aware that it is the intent to put that 3% language directly into the article. And then, I think in terms of what Mr. DeWart wanted to touch on, if the board would allow for a moment, is more so how you got to that 3% figure and how that is kind of calculated. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah, so the reason we're choosing 3% over other options is you can go anywhere from 0.5 to 3% and still adopt the law. But when you go to 3%, you can be eligible for rounds 2 and round 3 of the disbursement. So there's 3 rounds, and the second 2 are only available to towns that have adopted 3%, and the third one's only available to certain threshold towns, which is based on population and taxable property value, which we fall into the decile ranking that would put us available to get the most bang for the buck at 3%. We as a committee don't feel that below that threshold, it's really doing much for our committee. It's not enough to be worth the tax burden.
Yeah, that was the concern I had, as I looked at the language. Talks about a surcharge, but doesn't say how much the surcharge is.
Yeah.
Since your committee is recommending that, and you're going to ask people to vote on it at a special town meeting, it seems to me the more clarity you have about exactly what people are voting for, and the better.
Agreed.
And I don't see how you could possibly put the language as it is now, and then after the vote say, oh, it could be 1, could be 2, could be 3, we'll pick 3. Who
Yeah,
picks
well,
3?
I-
The voters have to pick 3.
I butted heads with the state CPA representative recently at a meeting where we were talking about these issues. Like, I think that we should have it on the ballot. People should know what they're voting for. They shouldn't be voting for a nebulous thing. That they can, we can include these exemptions. We can go 0.5%, we can go 2%, we can go 3%. I think that we should ask, the people should know what they're asking, what they're going to vote for. But this first town meeting vote isn't voting to adopt the law. It's voting to put the vote to the people at the next ballot. So while you and I have this concern, it's not necessarily as concerning as it feels in our guts, I think. I think you share the same feeling, but we're voting to whether to bring this to the people or not. The town meeting that's coming up is to vote to bring it to the people to vote on. It's not bringing the actual thing. It's not adopting it yet. At the point that we're adopting it on the ballot, like, we've got to have a bylaw written, we've got to have that number picked out and decided, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it, it's almost stated as a concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it-
State's adamant that that's how they like it.
And I think that at the town meeting, it ought to be more than a concept. It ought to be specific. That's why I asked about the exemptions, that I think it's, if the $100,000 exemption is part of the law, then you don't have to be explicit about it. But if it's something you can choose or not choose, then I think it is important to explain to people that this is something that is part of the overall Community Preservation Act.
I agree. There's several other variables that fall into that category, though, as well. Like, it's not just the exemptions. There's other things that people put in their bylaws that I think are along the same lines. It's not just the 100K.
So what you're saying, if I'm trying to follow this, is that if this vote passes at 3%, that doesn't give the exclusions, like for low income, the first 100,000, until a bylaw is adopted?
That's my understanding.
No,
No.
I can jump in there, no. Just to clarify, so it's the motion is where those things are gonna be called out. So in the handout that you all received, for example,
Real quick, Justin, can I ask you to clarify what is the motion? Is it, what's it on the ballot?
no, so good clarification. So at annual town meeting, you have your article, right, laid out here, and this is how it's gonna appear. But it is infrequent at a special and annual town meeting that we stand up and just read the article verbatim and people vote on it. Usually it's I move to, and it includes portions or all of the article, but then it also highlights some other aspects. So what the motion will look like effectively is, I move to see if the town will accept, et cetera, all through this. And then it would say something along the lines of inclusive of, and it would outline the items that are in the letter you received in your packet from the exploratory committee, which are the ones that Mark's referencing. So $100,000 in value would be taken off, right off the top. The exemptions for elderly or low-income individuals, for people who are really on the edge, because we've heard a lot of concern about that, the folks that are really squeezed right now, what about them? Well, there's an exemption for them. And so I think the exploratory committee, to their credit, they've really put me through the paces, but in terms of making sure that, in their own words, that certain guardrails are up and in place and established in advance of this thing. So you're not just throwing this up at town meeting on a hope and a prayer. There are specific guidelines already outlined. So the other piece of that is the side letter that you all should have received in your email, kind of highlighting what the expectations would be for a bylaw, even though it's not going through at this time. And I think a lot of that came from the folks in the committee wanting to, once again, clarify and be fully cards up with the community that if this thing passes, this is what we envision and expect it to look like. And in that letter, they're asking, for support or a commitment of support from the Board of Selectmen and a commitment of support from my office, supporting those elements. So on that list would be that it would be a committee of 9 individuals, that it would include 5 that are statutorily required, so from the Rec Commission, for example, from the Housing Authority, from the Conservation Commission, but it would also require 4 elected citizen seats in 3-year terms. And the important piece there was that it's not unusual from time to time for the town manager's office or the Board of Selectmen to make appointments in that type of committee. The exploratory committee was fairly insistent that they wanted this insulated from typical town operations. They felt in terms of the purity and the intent of this program was that it would be citizen-driven, purely citizen-driven. And so that was a major component as well. They also wanted to ensure that 5% of the amount accrued every year was not spent down, that every year you would retain and roll over at minimum 5% as a best practice. They also requested that 5% be set aside for administrative fees, so somebody that would, once again, independent of town hall, that would oversee and follow through on like the recording of deeds for open space and things like that, so those items don't get missed. So I think to the exploratory committee's credit, they've put out a lot of documents that have kind of I think eased a lot of folks in the community's concerns about some of these items. And I apologize to hog the conversation, but just to prop you guys up a little bit and to give you a pat on the back, you've all done a lot of work. So thank you for doing that.
I thought that was, the 5% was 10%.
Oh, it can be 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. That was the draft that I got from Dave.
Okay, so it keeps changing.
Mm.
That's not what I remember voting on, but.
Okay.
Okay, so if I understand this, we can add, or you would recommend that we would add 3% to the language,
The actual article language would include
Right.
3%. The other items,
should say by approving a surcharge of 3%.
Yep.
on-
and then the other items would be included in the motion, so people would know what they're voting on. It would be part of the motion.
And the
Only if
record,
they came to town meeting.
Well, if they didn't come to town meeting, then they wouldn't be voting on it.
Well, that's it. So if they don't know what it is that's on the table, they may not come. That's my concern with
That's
with the transparency and with getting that message out there. How can we get it out exactly what all of this entails?
Well, we've been coming to every,
So that we have an online paper, we have hard copy papers. There has to be a way, because the warrant's available to everyone. So if it
That's
was
why we're here.
actually in, may I finish?
But-
If it was actually in the warrant, and they got that from a copy or from online, they could read it and talk about it. And I know that we say, well, we've talked about this so much. Well, those directly involved in government have, but I bet you if you walk down the street and ask 20 people about CPA, you'd get 18 blank stares. And I know part of that responsibility is theirs, but I think the heaviest onus is on us to make sure they understand what's coming before them.
I'm in agreement with that, and I'll toss it over to Mark in a second, but I think to this group's credit, they have put out a lot of documentation on this. This is probably the 30th public meeting I've discussed this topic myself, and I understand most people don't watch these because they're not the most exciting thing in the world. But they've attended Fall Fest, they had a booth at Fall Fest, they've been getting the word out. And I do agree with the importance of trying to, shed a spotlight on this. I think the other component, though, is if you look at other examples, like Chapter 70, for example, that funds schools, we never spell out really in the nitty-gritty, line by line, what's in a school budget every year in the warrant article language, but it's available as a piece of supplemental information, so people still come and vote on it.
Right.
And so I think if we do a good job of putting out the supplemental information that, I mean, this group has put together a lot. They have, and you have just some of it here, but the one sheet, for example, the letter of recommendation that was distributed to the Board of Selectmen that highlights all of those different exemptions that they're recommending, as well as the sheet kind of breaking down in, $25,000 increments, like narrowing down what the actual tax impact would be. These are all important things, but if they kind of come to this meeting and die and don't get distributed, then there's really not much value in it. So I can work with the committee to help them get the word out and distribute these in the local media, on social media, on the town website, and just make sure people have access to that and they're aware of it.
Yeah, because this is awesome, this document. It clearly and very concisely explains what it's all about. You listen to some of the meetings and you go, what? Because I even look at the article and it's surcharge on property. We'll determine the amount sometime. We'll determine what fiscal year it will commence, maybe. There's nothing definitive in there. It's just sort of up in the air. And so if they read that, it's like, huh?
Right.
And when you say a surcharge on property, folks that are renters think, well, it's not going to affect me. Well, yeah, it is, because it's going to trickle down. Businesses are going to be taxed. It's going to trickle down. So it is going to affect everyone, and they need to understand it's not just property owners.
And I think some of that goes, and once again, I hate to speak for the entire committee, but I think in a broader sense, in terms of that trickle-down component, I think a lot of the items that this initiative would fund in town, the long-term benefit of that would trickle down to those people as well, in terms of, building a stronger community that would encourage more business investment, and would encourage new revenue streams that would help lift some of that burden off the taxpayers' back. But it's going to take that little upfront and a little bit of belief to grow that over the next 5 or 10 years.
I guess my other thing is saying if it's 3% or nothing. So if somebody on town floor did say, I make a motion to reduce that to 2%, is that such a bad thing? Because at least it would get it off the ground. Could they not come back the following spring and say, can we go up 1% to meet that 3%? Because
So,
at least it would get the start going.
that historically is an approach towns have taken.
That
That is historically an approach some towns have taken, is they start at a lower rate with the hopes to increase it, like you're saying. After our exploration, we decided that we don't think it's a good idea to go that route. We think we should go 3% or nothing. As a committee, that's what we decided. I think that if the town's not ready to do this at this point, I personally think that we should be at 3% or not. And if we're not, we should bring it back up in 2 years. Like, and historically, this thing has failed in towns 2 or 3, or like up to 2 times before it's accepted. And once it's accepted, it always stays. Like, nobody's ever gotten rid of it. So even if we don't do this now, I think we should still do it in the end, but I think we should start at the 3% and educate the public about it being 3%, because what 3% brings is so much more than any other percentage.
Right, but I think the question was, can somebody at the town meeting floor make a motion to amend the article to read 2%? I think they can. Might not be what the committee wants, but I mean, I think it would fit within
So,
the operation of the town meeting.
yeah, and I think that that's gonna, I'm kind of blurry about that, because you're gonna wind up having, I'm gonna be making motions to bring in some of the guidelines that the town is hesitant to adopt at this point, and then it's gonna be a 4-hour meeting. But typically what happens is the towns decide to bring this to a vote, which is what this town meeting is we're gonna decide to bring it to a ballot. And then after that point, our committee will have some PR events, and we'll have some open meetings to the public, and we'll toss it around and see how people react and ask for public input. At that point, we'll refine more of our suggestion, and then I don't know how it gets on the ballot at that point, because the bylaw doesn't typically get written until the thing is adopted at the ballot, which is an issue I've personally had with it from the beginning, but.
Could I add to that a little bit as well?
Yes. There's a person, another committee member, I know that
Yeah, my
presented
name's
to
Adam
us.
Gardner. I'm also on the exploratory committee. One interesting thing about the 3% that's in the paper that,
Right right into the mic.
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
One interesting thing about the 3% that hasn't been part of the discussion yet is there's some tentative support from Robertson Broadhurst to pitch in for a third of that. So the surcharge to residents would only be 2%, even though,
That's,
From
that's a hope, though, so you have to go with the
Yeah,
3%. 'cause we
certainly,
don't know. I
certainly.
mean, if it comes at 2, thank you very much, but
yeah, that would
We-
be super.
yeah.
But that is definitely part of
Yeah.
the mix. And the other thing to emphasize, I think, with the 3 versus 2 is, as Mark was alluding to, the disproportionate increase in funds. It's not like we get 1.5 times as much to spend as we go from 2 to 3, because 2 is 1.5 times 3. It's we go from 2 to 3, and the statewide match goes from, I don't know, 50 to 100% or 60 to 100%, 30 to 100%. So the match is disproportionate, and that's hugely motivating from an investment, from a financial investment perspective. That's a big part of why we as a committee are most enthusiastic about that rate.
The going to 3% makes you eligible for round number 2 and 3 of the disbursements. The first disbursement is, you know, last few years, I think it's been around 35%, and of a match of the surcharge. Whereas once you get to round 2 and 3, you can get up to 100%.
Yeah,
You're not eligible for those rounds unless you're in
Right.
at 3%.
I understand that, and I understand that's what the committee is recommending, and
Yeah.
that's why they're recommending it.
Yeah.
I'm not objecting to that. As I said, I think that adding clarity, certainly the 3% at the very least, the fact that you've got a series of recommendations, see if I can find my notes here, on the exemptions. As I read it, it says, yes, you recommend to adopt. I'm thinking, who does the adopting? You know, if it's going to be part of what you're proposing, the people vote on, include the exemptions. I can't see where it would be anything but,
Helpful.
you know, additional information to support your proposal.
I am completely on the same page.
Yeah.
In my mind, we should have written a bylaw and put it on the warrant to say that if we adopt this, we adopt it with this bylaw. That's what I wanted to do. And the state came in and the lawyers came in and said they don't recommend that. And that nobody else has ever had the concerns that you and I and Mo are sharing tonight. I'm fully on board with you guys.
I think hell probably froze over Mr. Dort, because I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think that if you have the bylaw and your motion doesn't pass, then you just pass over the bylaw.
Exactly. So I think that the state was like, really had a hard time with, they said that my concerns, which now are evidently yours, have not been ever expressed in their 20 years. And I find that astonishing, that nobody's expressed this concern before. The way the state wants you to do it is to vote to bring it to the ballot, vote for it at the ballot, and then the committee that's formed thereafter spends
Then
6
you-
months to a
then you
year
write
to
the
write a bylaw, hoping that it's going to implement what the people intended.
But-
It's
that's
kind of
just
the
way
old
too
adage,
nebulous for
trust
me.
me, I'm the government, I'm here for your goodwill. And
Yeah.
I think the solution is we bring it, we vote to bring it to the ballot, and then our committee meets with the public and talks about what people want, and we create a bylaw, and then we put that bylaw at the next town meeting and say that if we vote for this at the ballot, if it's accepted at the ballot, this bylaw goes in automatically. There's nothing to preclude us from that. We can bring that as a citizen, we can put a warrant article up to say that, and people can choose to vote for it or not. They can vote for something nebulous if they want to.
So there's a slight benefit to that direction as well, though, that I don't want to get lost, is that doing it the way the state is recommending doing it is a little bit of a built-in kill switch, which I think is to the benefit of some folks. So passing this, it requires a simple majority, half. Passing it at the ballot, it requires a simple majority, half. So that would authorize the town to start taking in the money. To actually spend the money, though, on any projects, in order to get a bylaw in, that's a 2/3 lift. And I think that's the important piece for anybody that's nervous about it or thinking that this thing's just gonna get hammered through and then they're gonna be spending money like drunken sailors. Like, no, you still have to do the work, because you have to get 2/3 of the people in the room to agree to what that bylaw language is. And I think that's an important piece that shouldn't be lost. And then also, in turn, not to veer from that topic, but an important component as well that we talk about a lot is we're talking about the match, but what does that come to in real dollars? And I don't want that to get lost in the conversation either. I'm surprised the question hasn't come up yet. You know, oh, the state's matching, like, how much money is that actually? So it would come out to a little over $250,000 a year. So what that means is, if the town of Winchendon had implemented the Community Preservation Act in the early 2000s, when it first became an option through the Mass Legislature, you know, by example, something like the old Murdoch, that's a multi-million-dollar initiative that we're straining ourselves to pay for, you know, money that we could have been spending on roads or other areas we're paying to restore that building. The state would have paid for that entirely, top to bottom, every single penny.
if the town voted to
If
approve it.
the town had voted for it. And so I think that's an important thing that I want people to really roll around in their head, is, you know, putting something off like that. You know, I understand, I think people have different drivers, but, you know, the type of difference that influx of funds can make in this community, and it, you know, not just for the typical types of projects, but other ones that typically are not funded in the community. People bring up things like dog parks, expanding sections of rail trail. That's a big initiative. People are talking about how it just stops at downtown, but they want to connect to New Hampshire. How are you going to pay for that? And this type of legislation, if passed locally, would pay for those types of initiatives that people want to see in town, but we have no way to pay for them. So just something to be mindful of.
I want to drill down on that 250 grand getting matched is 250 grand. And I'll pick an example. There's a town, Monson, that has a very similar demographic as we do, and all the measurements that go into picking your decile ranking of how you get matched. And they've been at that same decile ranking since they adopted it, and they first brought in money in 2008. In 2009, they got 100%, 97% in 2010, 75%, 75%, 76, 100, 93, 86, 60, 51, 63, 77, 90, 100%. So when we say 100% match, which is the language that's been used, I think it's kind of a mistake, because 100% match isn't 100%. It's, you're getting the most you can. And that's an example of a town that's on par with us, how much they've gotten. So they generally get close to 100, but they dip. And that's based on how much is in the CPA fund. I still think it's worth doing. I just think that we need to be we don't need to tell the people it's 100% when we don't know it's gonna be that or not.
Fair point. Thank you.
I think the other thing is the timing, and I know you're gonna say it doesn't matter when is a good time, but when you look at Facebook in the last month, it blew up over the utility bills that have increased, doubled and tripled in some cases. So that's adding between $1,200 and $2,400 a year to people's bills. Groceries are up 39%. Heating fuel, home fuel, car fuel is up. We have a fire station plan for $34. We have a water line, $176. So that's $200 on a $280,000 home. Plus, say $1,200 for your utilities. It's going to be a hard sell to the community that's bleeding and hurting just to make sure their home is warm and they have food on the table. And when you say, it's going to preservation and the trails and all great things, but not if my kids are starving.
There is an exemption, though. I'm fully
Yeah.
on page with you, and, this has been in my mind as to whether to recommend this or not, because people in this town are hurting, and
Yeah, they're
especially the
hurting,
fires.
really hurting.
But there is an exemption that we're recommending, which is lower income and
But-
elderly
but
don't
that's-
get exempted from this.
That's the property owner that would be the exemption, not the renter or the leaser and they're still going to be impacted because their rent's going to go up, their lease is going to go. So although it might not be as much, it's still going to impact them.
The language of the law says property owned and occupied. I don't know if that makes a distinction.
I don't
It's kind of
know.
ambiguous. I don't know if it covers your point or not.
It's typical government double talk.
Yeah. We're really on the same page tonight. It's amazing.
You're clicking.
Go home now.
I think there is an interesting point or complexity from that, which is, there's two ways to think about the CPA and the directions that funds would go. One, which we've talked about recently, is things that might not fall into the purview of normal town priorities. The other is things that would fall into the purview of town priorities, like the old Murdoch School. So while we as residents have paid for 100% of the cost of rebuilding it, because it's gone from 100% property taxes, if that money came from CPA, we as residents would have paid for 50% of it. So if the priority of the town is to save money overall above, projects that might not make it into the normal flow of business, CPA is a really good way to unlock money from the state to pay for things effectively ourselves at a 50% or 60% rate that ordinarily we would pay 100% for if they weren't eligible for that matching funds. So while it is appealing and inspiring from a small d democratic nature of here's a project that I think would be really cool and I can convince the voters and town would never go for it, but we can do it because it's CPA. On the other hand, that money is totally valid to be used for things that we as residents, as the tax base, would have to pay for 100% if the CPA didn't exist. So I'm not discounting the cost of inflation and the pain that has brought on the community, but there is an investment lens that we can put on the CPA depending on where projects go and where the town thinks projects should go that could make the financial argument stronger.
It's financially the best thing to do. I just don't know that folks can afford it. We'll see.
Are there any other questions or comments? Yes. Jane? Could you come up to the mic, Jane?
Because I appreciate listening to this, because I read,
We can't hear you, sorry.
I know, and I got a mask on. I appreciate listening to this because I read this and didn't understand at all what this was about. I thought I understood the community preservation and what it was supposed to do, and it wasn't clear at all in this. But what I don't see in this is that actually where, this is just agreement at town meeting to put it on a ballot. I don't see that specified here.
No.
And I think at other warrants, I've seen that specified, so people kind of know. Because even though we might say it, if people, people might not be hearing everything that's said at the town meeting. So if it can be said here that what you're voting on is to put it on a ballot, like we did for the fire station, I think that would be helpful.
Thank you.
That's it. Oh, here, I'll give this back.
Very good. So I can comment on that a little bit, and I do agree with that. The hard part is you're getting into legalese, right? So it's a state program. It's probably one of the best state programs you're ever going to find, to be honest, but it's still a state program. And so, you know, the needs, I guess, that were just expressed, it is saying that. So when it's saying the town will accept sections 3 to 7, inclusive of chapter 44B, et cetera, if you go and read the law, what that is saying is, in accepting that you are going to put it on a ballot. But how many folks in town are actually going to pull out, you know, chapter 44B and start reading it up and down? I do agree. I think it's something we should call out, but once again, it's not something that we can specifically put in the language like you would see on a debt exclusion typically. So it's just not something that we can add. But I think in terms of the process, it's been hammered through and covered several times over in public meetings. But I think it would be important to have a sheet kind of highlighting maybe a flow chart that, you know, if it passes here, here's where it goes. If it fails, here's where it goes. And just so people can kind of follow along and better understand that process, to know that if this passes, that doesn't implement it in town. It sends it to the ballot. And I think for the same thing for the ballot, that if it passes the ballot, that doesn't actually form the bylaw forming the committee. That's at the town meeting, you know, 2 weeks later. I think it's the election's on the 1st, and is that right, Mo?
So, Mr. Saltzberg, what is the possibility of having the selectmen amend Article 5 at Monday's meeting, where you do put in some of these things for clarification?
So for the 3%
The
piece,
3%, I know you're going to go for that.
I can
but-
confirm.
But what about the exemptions? Couldn't you just have a paragraph underneath to
Just
be-
as supplemental,
Yeah,
I'll ask. You know, it wouldn't hurt to ask.
because what I'm hearing tonight is that the more clarity, I think, the better chance you have. The more we couch it with this, pull it out of your hat, like this article means that it's going to go to a vote, really?
Right.
It's not going to fly.
We're
I
asking
mean,
for a lot of trust,
yeah,
Yeah.
increased taxes.
a lot of trust.
Right. Right, because if you just I'm comparing this to what we just went through with the fire station.
That's
And with the
right.
fire station, it was very clear that if you vote for this, it's gonna go to ballot.
And
And then
this
if
is-
it passes that ballot, this is what your
And this
amount
is
is gonna be.
exactly what you're getting.
But if I look at this, you know, and I'm still, you know, I don't get that. I don't take
No.
away from this, you know, I read into it, and, you know, being on the finance committee, I read into, okay, I think that's what this means, but,
Yeah. Yeah.
I just
Sure.
think, yeah.
Your
to have the
feedback is
clarity.
received. So I will check with legal counsel one more time. Like I said, it was a
And I-
battle
and I-
today to get that 3
I
in there,
guess-
but
From my point of checking with legal counsel is that just because they say you don't have to do it, as long as it's not illegal to do it, it doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do.
no, I agree with that. And I think it's been, well, for me personally, since I've come to town, it's always been my mantra that I'm a cards up person, always. There's no sneakery going on here. But I think for this committee in particular too, the level of commitment from these folks sitting in front of you to make sure that it was a fully transparent process and people knew exactly what they were voting on. I mean, this isn't the first time the Community Preservation Act has come up in this town, but I can tell you that this is probably the most informed this town has ever been on this topic. And a lot of that, I think, comes from the work that the folks on this committee are doing. But when it comes to the language of this article, it's not deliberately vague.
No,
in an
but it's
effort-
total antithesis of being transparent.
But what I'm trying to say is it's not deliberately vague in an effort to hide something or to sneak something through. It's literally, and Mark and all can attest to this, it was what was recommended by the state. And so when it's the executive director of the Community Preservation Coalition is telling us to use this language, I typically defer to my experts, and I'm not going to say, well, that sounds great, but I don't like it. And so we've been moving forward based on that assumption, but I think we've heard overwhelmingly from folks that they want to see it in there. So, you know, it's late tonight, but tomorrow I'm going to get them on the phone first thing in the morning and say, hey, what can we do to kind of strike a middle ground here? Because the feedback I've received is people want to see it spelled out in black and white. Is there a way that we can do that legally that's not going to mess it up? It's not a magic, you know, spell. You don't have to hit every word and every note perfectly. And so there is flexibility there sometimes, and I'll try to find some way to get that in there. The Board of Selectmen, we're planning on amending it Monday anyway to get that 3% piece in. I'm sure they can put the other pieces in too. one concern I had was if that invalidates this public hearing. And legal counsel confirmed it did not, because we're discussing all of these items. It's all within the four corners of that article. The question is whether or not it's gonna be spelled out specifically in the language or not, or if it's gonna be making an appearance in the motion. So if anybody has concerns about that, it's not an issue.
I'm not sure that whether this is invalidated by Monday's vote is pertinent, as this doesn't affect the CPA itself. And this is just a vote of support. This is not an actual vote that affects anything other than perception in people's minds.
Well, except that you'd like clarity on what it is we vote on tonight.
Yeah, yeah, of course. But I'm saying,
I
like,
mean, there's a lot of ifs that, that we would expect right now to happen on Monday.
yeah.
In terms of changing the language as it reads right now, but
So if it changes, can you amend your vote on the floor of the town meeting?
Well, we can postpone our vote until after they
Oh, I
amend
see what
it.
you're saying, okay.
For a recommendation, but also what I would offer is nothing is changing, whether it's in the article or not. We're laying out for you what it is. This committee has laid out what it is. So you could recommend tonight, because literally
Or not.
nothing is gonna change. But if you wanted to wait, you could wait.
Because the other issue is not just the clarity in the language, but you need to understand that adding to that is the fact that we're having a special town meeting in March, which is like, why? Why are they doing that? They've never done that. What is that all about? So you're sort of, people's mistrust is, the hackles are at high alert as to the why. So the more clear you are, the less gossip they can generate.
That definitely makes sense, and I think, there's an obligation on the other side, things of too as well, and I think it came up in this conversation of like trust us, just trust us. But I would hope, at some point, the community would trust us because we've earned the trust. There's gotta be a light at the end of the tunnel at some point there, but we'll continue working to earn it, so.
Got it. Mr. Kane, public.
yes.
Hello. Is this on?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Okay.
You have to
Right.
go right
We're having a
to it.
really hard time hearing you out there.
Yes.
Really hard time.
Hard time hearing up here, so.
Yeah. I'm Jill Sackett. I chair, in the spirit of transparency, I chair a couple of different committees in town. I also am involved in a couple of nonprofits that have benefited from Robinson Broadhurst funding. But I'm here tonight just as a citizen. I'm not speaking on behalf of any particular committee that I'm involved in or nonprofit I'm involved in. I'm a fan. I want to see this pass. I'm concerned, the way many of you already are, about how to sell this properly and how to make sure people really understand what this is and what it's going to give them. So I think this document is a great start. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But it's not a document I would hand out to voters. So it's too complicated. You're going to lose folks. Yeah. So I just would like to suggest a couple of things to try to sell this. Justin, you already touched on one. You read through all of this, but I'm a voter and I'm looking at this and I'm going, I don't know how much money we're going to get out of this. So if you can actually run a number and go, if this was in place last year and, people paid into it, we would get anywhere from, it's going to be between 0.3 times 1. You're going to get a range depending on what the state pays that year, matches that year. Last year, we would have gotten X to Y amount of money. Thank you to the state and thank you to those of you who were surcharged, to spend as you, the citizens, vote on, in town. And I think that they need a real solid number. I don't even know, you said 250,000. That's helpful. That's a lot of money. That's $250,000. So that's important, I think, to communicate to the folks. The other thing is, to be clear, do you have to be able to fund an entire project? Or can this be partial of, because some of our stuff around here is super high ticket. So are you going to be able to, use CPA toward something, and then you have to get some other money to keep going, or you're going to have to do it in phases or something? But I think you have to be a little clear on how flexible it is to spend the money. I think the gentleman on the end there, I couldn't quite hear what you said, but I think you touched on it, that this talk about, oh, well, maybe we can cut it back, and what if we get a vote on the floor to say, oh, let's only pay in 2% or 1% or whatever. If I'm understanding, there's a real penalty to not go with the whole 3%. And I think that has to be made really clear to the voters, because if you really want everything you want out of this, you got to put in the 3%. Otherwise, you get these fractions of help from the state. You're really not getting the biggest bang for your buck. So somehow to say that. The other thing was, and we touched on this a little bit, I'm still not really clear who else is going to get surcharged. Like if I'm a renter, on paper it looks like I don't get surcharged. It doesn't look like I'm not going to get sent I don't have a real estate bill here, so I'm not going to pay. But is there going to be trickle down, and
Your rent's going to go up. So,
I don't.
yeah.
So, but then what might that mean to a renter? We don't know how much the landlord's going to pass on, but maybe we have to kind of think about that. What would that look like, and would it be gouging? Like can they charge more than the 3% that they're actually having to pay as the landlord because they own property here? I think there are some concerns about that for people who are financially pinched. Then I think what also would really help is to help people really visualize how this money might get spent. Once you give them the amount, okay, last year we would have had $250,000. Give them actual examples in your little please vote sheet for each of the 4 categories. So like, hey, if we had had this money, there could have been a committee, and then you, the voter, could have picked on something like, and then give them an actual concrete example. A dog park in town, for item 1, or fixing up this, the senior center that's falling down in front of us, or some recreation thing or some housing thing, but give them an actual project that they can actually think about in their town and in their community. So I would recommend that. Do I still have a couple more minutes?
Look
Yep.
to the chair, not to me.
So that's that. And then last item, and this is really important for me, I'm very, very concerned about scenario B and Robinson Broadhurst. I think it has to be really clear to the voters whether they're voting for 3% or not, or whether they think the cavalry is going to come in and Robinson Broadhurst is going to come in and pay for 1%. I am adamantly opposed to Robinson Broadhurst getting involved in this. They are in such extreme demand that some of you who know how they fund around here, they have paid for so much stuff in town. And the ask is 2, 3, 4 times, what they have to pay out already. They're already, doing that sort of thing. I think the time has come for property owners here in Winchendon who have benefited for years and years and years with the most extraordinary foundation here in town to put some more skin in the game. And I'm a property owner, and I'm ready to pay. But I'm telling you, I feel Robinson Broadhurst needs some relief. Please don't pressure them to pay into this. They're already paying in a lot. And if I get any inkling that that's part of the apron strings here, I won't vote for it. I won't vote for it. So please take Robinson Broadhurst out of the equation. And those are all my comments. Thank you.
Sure. So if I could just respond to the last piece in particular. So in several, I've had this conversation with several people in the community and several people on the committee as well, that, the expectation should be laid forth with the voters that on the assumption it's going to be 3%. And if, something better happens, then great. But assume that it's going to be 3%, because we don't want to be in a situation where we're promising something that we have no control over coming through fruition. So that's one piece. The other piece is the Robinson Broadhurst Foundation, in early conversations with me and the chair of the exploratory committee, had softly committed for a 5-year run. And the reason that it would be 5 years is that by law, if this were to go through, there has to be pretty much a 5-year moratorium before the community can vote to remove it. No community ever has voted to remove it, but if Winchendon's after 5 years said, we really don't like this and we want to get rid of it, that way there's a bit of an escape hatch for the Robinson Broadhurst Foundation, but also an opportunity if they want to step aside and say, all right, well, if you like this, do you want to pick up this whole thing? The other component was for 1%, what it comes out to Robinson Broadhurst on average, just for the town, like the gov town, typically on average contribute about $1 million a year to projects. The ask to pick up that 1% was about $85,000. So we were pretty sensitive to the fact that we didn't want to absorb their other resources. But the other component, and I guess one of the benefits for Robinson Broadhurst Foundation, is getting something like this off the ground. While it might take baby steps initially, in the long term is going to provide a lot of relief to them, and so that's kind of their benefit in the immediate. But I do agree they are taxed pretty heavily.
Sorry, and then one more thing, then I'll leave, I promise. I also think that the idea of Robinson Broadhurst paying into this and basically ceding the decision-making to the town/committee /voters runs completely counter to how they operate now. So it was really surprising to me that the Board of Trustees and the advisors of the Robinson Broadhurst Foundation would be happy to pay into a process that they have no call, no say over after that process, and how that would work relative to the other monies that they have to meet on in May and figure out how to apportion out. They've got this disparate thing going on with this Robinson Broadhurst money that they no longer get to decide how to use it. It really surprised me that they might be willing to do that, but that's their purview. They can do that, but.
So I wouldn't want to speak for them, but I wouldn't say they were happy to give up that control. In fact, it was probably one of the biggest drawbacks, and it's going to be one of the hardest pills for them to swallow, I would say. But I think what eases that concern a little bit, and I've talked about this with some of the committee members, is if you look at what the Community Preservation Act, in terms of their mission, if you look on the website, and if you look at the Robinson Broadhurst Foundation's mission, and if I were to take the titles off of each of them and hand it to you and say which one of this is Robinson Broadhurst and which one of this is the CPA, most people wouldn't be able to tell me. Their missions are hand in hand, and I think that's kind of makes it a little bit easier for the Robinson Broadhurst Foundation, without speaking for them.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, if there aren't any, is there any new comments?
I have I do, Tom.
Yes.
Just a couple of comments. First of all, I'm in favor of this. I think it would be great for the community. It would clearly be the first time that I've volunteered to pay more tax, but I'm willing to do that. But I think a lot of people will need to be sold further on the process. For example, it might be helpful to know how many communities have adopted this in the state
155-ish.
and how many locally. And so, and the
Templeton
other,
has adopted it.
pardon?
Templeton has adopted it.
Okay, great.
And Royalston.
And Royalston. And again, if I'm trying to vote on this, are there success stories from some of these other communities where, they adopted it 5 years ago, and this is the money that they've had gotten in revenue, this is the money that's come in from the state, they've used the money for whatever purpose. But the more that we can share success elsewhere, I think the better chance we'll have to prove it.
So there is on the website, the CPA, all that information is available if you dig. Every piece of data is available.
Not
You
everyone's
can
gonna
see
read
what
it,
types
though,
of
right?
projects they've put it towards and how much they've gotten. Like I have several towns here, what they've received every year and what they've paid in taxes, so. I mean, it's all,
Yep.
it's all there. But yeah, it needs to be sold.
I think it definitely is in the wheelhouse of our committee to contextualize that big lake of data from the state and say, here's what Templeton's done, here's what Royalston has done, here's how the vote went in Westminster and why it didn't pass. Our peer communities. So that's good feedback, thank you.
I think it'd be helpful to understand that we were tasked with exploring it and then suggesting whether we adopt it or not, or go ahead with the process. And the way the state has it laid out, obviously, is confusing. But we're just we're at the state where we've suggested we adopt it, and we're gonna put it on the ballot. Once we decide to put it on the ballot, then our committee goes and does some more nitty-gritty. So we're not done with the nitty-gritty. So just, I mean, it feels like the perception is that we're done and we're ready to say go vote. There's gonna be a whole time period between getting it set up for the ballot and then when it happens at the ballot.
Yeah.
To be advertised. So all these points can be, need to be addressed during that time frame, for sure.
But you gotta get past the first step first.
Yeah,
So I think most of the comments have been suggestions on
yeah.
how you can make that happen.
Yeah.
All right, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to move on to Article 6.
Thank you, guys.
Yes,
you.
thank you.
I think you've got enough direction now, you should be working 24/7 for the next 4 months.
Article 6 is the Whitney Pond Dam non-binding referendum. See if the town will vote. To recommend the Board of Selectmen seek grant or other available funds for the purpose of making certain improvements to the Whitney Pond Dam such that water levels in Whitney Pond will be higher and restored to the levels obtained when the dam was originally installed, rather than proceeding with a more cost-effective repair to the existing dam with available funds that would keep the water level at its current lower level, but permit the dam to continue functioning as needed for the foreseeable future. All right, Mr. Sosbach.
We're almost there, everybody. So this one's pretty easy. So the Whitney Pond Dam, which is the large one by Black Bridge near the bike path, several years ago, I guess, was hit by a large sheet of ice. It sustained significant damage, and the water levels were drawn down. The dam was partially dismantled, and it hasn't really been touched since. So a lot of people in town asked me about that dam and what the intention is. Didn't we get a chunk of money for that at some point? So there was a bond bill, several $1 million the town received quite some time ago now. But the issue with bond bills is they're unfunded. So it's not unusual for the legislature to parade around in some capacity that they secured funds for a community, but until the time the governor actually releases those funds, it's realistically useless. So credit to DPW Director Brian Croto, who actually went and petitioned the state to release some of those funds to start the design process. That's something we've been trying to implement more and more in town, is to get a design done. So that helps us go out and get grant funds for something later. So they did release about $300,000 of that money to do the design. We're about midway through, or maybe a third of the way through with tie and bond, at least on the preliminary side of existing infrastructure. But they hit a crossroads that they called Brian about, looking for direction. Brian called me looking for direction. I called the chair of the Board of Selectmen looking for direction, and it was her recommendation to bring it to this special town meeting. So basically what it's asking is, in simple terms, would the town prefer that the Board of Selectmen seek out additional grants or other funds to repair that dam back to where it used to be historically, raising the water levels, knowing that you're taking on some element of risk in doing so, but also it's going to be a significant expense? Or would the town prefer that we kind of shore things up the way they are, leave the water levels where they're at currently, present day, and just kind of walk away from the thing? I personally have no preference, and I would like direction on that one. I think the Board of Selectmen would also like some direction on that one. If the community determines that they want to see the water levels go back up, they want to see that dam, repaired in a larger, more expensive fashion, then that's the direction we'll take, and we'll start pursuing grant funds immediately or steering resources towards that. But if folks determine that they're kind of fine with the way it is and we have other priorities, well, then that's fine too, but just let us know. That's the intent of the article.
Questions?
So a question that I have, because I had to read this one a few times with the way that it was worded. Does it mean that if we vote for this, that means that we're allowing the town of, or the Board of Selectmen to go after the grants?
Yes.
Where, okay.
And we're gonna highlight that on town meeting floor. Unfortunately, it has to be in a yes or no format. You can't do an A or B format. So we'll make it clear to people when the time comes to actually vote that the yes means you wanna go with the more expensive option that's gonna raise the water. We'll just boil it down, keep it
And you'll
simple.
also highlight the benefits of both.
Yep, yep. Which, and that came up in the selectmen meeting as well. And to be honest, outside of, professional expertise, like I'm always happy to provide my opinion on things. This one really is just, it comes down to preference. There's not much there isn't anything I could point to specifically, anything tangible beyond people like the water level higher.
But if it's higher, do we have more access with canoes, with rafting, with boating, with
Boats, like,
fishing?
the town's invested a lot of
Can we use the
money.
park to access it then for launching?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, we don't see the stumps out there and,
right, yep, so but like I said, like, it doesn't take like an expert, like, those are things that everybody, we could list. And I think that part of it is to kind of, or part of the intent of this article is to like start that conversation. Because there's oftentimes, more often than not, it's like we're screaming into the void asking for feedback on some issues. But I think if we put this on as an article and we at least have a room of at least 75 people for a town meeting in that room, people are going to lob out some ideas and kind of get the juices flowing. So I think that's the hope. We can definitely put, the low-hanging fruit items that you all listed up on to like start it off. But I'm sure other people are going to have other input. Downside obviously is that if you're putting the water level up higher, there's a higher risk. You're retaining a lot of water. The benefit, though, is that if there's a large storm event and you need to retain more water, you can hold back more water and spare, spots downtown. The big investment that Bullspit's going to be making at 4 Summer Drive, there's going to be some element of control for how the water flows through that dam, so it doesn't all just pass through. Elements like that, but we can list
and
them
then
out.
conservation to say, well, you're going to destroy bird habitat or whatever if we
Right.
raise it, so how is that, state law going to impact if you even can raise it?
And that's actually, interestingly, this already started stirring the pot of conversation because a resident who lives down on Pond Street visited my office yesterday or the day before, expressing that ever since the water went down, there used to be a lot of heron nests, but when the water went down, they never came back.
Yeah, I haven't
So,
seen them in years.
Yeah, so things like that. So, let's talk about it as a town, give us some direction, and if people want to go for it, well, let's go for it.
Yeah.
Right?
So it's a non-binding referendum. It's simply the voice of the town recommending or not recommending that the Board of Selectmen pick A or B.
Correct.
Now, the language suggests that there is some repair that's necessary or is going to be required.
One way or another.
One way or another.
Yep.
Any idea of what that would entail in terms of cost?
So the engineers are gonna give us cost estimates. It's not gonna be a biddable number, but they should be able to back into something within reason that will at least be able, if it's a difference like, by example, if it's a difference of like $100,000, well, then I think most people would say, all right, raise the water level. But if the difference is $3 million, then that might give people pause. So we wanna try to narrow down what that actual delta is between those 2 points.
Right. Any other questions or comments? All right. So we've listened to the 6 articles on the special town meeting from March 13th. And the first article is the committee report. And it's not going to be a committee report.
I make a motion to pass over Article 1, reports of committees.
Second.
Motion made and seconded by Chuck. Any discussions about Article 1? Hearing none, the motion is to pass over Article 1. Mr. Reed?
Yes.
Mr. Guerrero?
Aye.
Schwartz?
Aye.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Prior year bills, to approve the use of free cash to cover $1,394.86 for prior year bills.
I make a motion to recommend Article 2.
Second?
Motion made, seconded by Mr. Delay. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Reed.
Aye.
Mr. Guerrero.
Aye.
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 The chair votes aye. Article 3 was to appropriate $40,000 from free cash for broadcasting equipment upgrades.
I make a motion to recommend Article 3.
Second.
All right, motion made, seconded by Mr. Quartz. Any questions or discussions? Hearing none. Mr. Reed.
Aye.
Mr. Guerrero.
Aye.
Mr.
Aye.
Quartz.
Aye.
Aye.
The chair votes aye. The town bylaw amendment on the Recreation Department.
I make a motion to recommend Article 4.
Second?
Moved and seconded by Mr. Delay. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none. Take a vote. Mr. Reed?
Aye.
Mr. Guerrero?
Aye.
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 The chair votes aye. All right. The Community Preservation Act. We certainly have heard a lot of information about that tonight. I don't know if everybody's questions are clarified. I'm not sure all of mine are.
I'd like to make a motion to table our vote on this until after the selectmen meeting on Monday to see if they ratify. So we could add this to our agenda. I know we're meeting at 6:30. We meet with the selectmen at 7. We could go back to our own meeting after we hear from the CIP or after they make their recommendations. I would just, before I vote on this, I would like to see more clarity in it.
Discussion.
We need a second.
Second.
And seconded by Mr. Quartz. Yeah, I agree too. I mean, I certainly understand that's the intention to add to the article as it's written right now. I mean, from my own perspective, it requires, for the sake of the voters, it requires clarity about how much money, 3% is the bottom line. I think a lot of the other suggestions, including the exemptions and things of that nature, add clarity to it and would enhance the chances of it passing from my perspective. But I think that there, at the very least, people have to know what it is they're voting for. It makes no sense to say we'll have a surcharge and then explain at the meeting, it could be 1, could be 2, could be 3, and ask people to vote on that. So that's, I'd agree with you that if we give it a little more time and wait and see what the final
Yeah, and I don't think we're
article
going to hold
reads.
anything up, because the selectmen vote on Monday anyhow, and as long as we vote at the same time, we're not delaying the process.
Yeah,
But-
I'll revise my agenda a little bit so
Okay.
that
So we can put that in, yeah.
we
I just think as finance, we're black and white, dollars and cents, and to accept something like this with such a huge leap of faith, just, it doesn't sit well.
Okay, so there's a motion to postpone our vote, our recommendation on Article 5.
Till Monday.
And it's been seconded by Chuck?
Yep.
Until Monday, right. Any questions or discussion? All right, hearing none. Mr. Reed?
Aye.
Mr. Guerrero?
Aye.
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 The chair votes aye. Article 6, the Whitney Pond Dam non-binding referendum.
I'll make the motion to recommend Article 6.
Right, motion to
second.
recommend.
Your turn, Doug.
Seconded by Mr. Delay. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Reed.
Aye.
Mr. Guerrero.
Aye.
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 The chair votes aye. All right. So we do have, meeting on Monday. We're gonna meet at 6:30, go through the year-to-date reports and, what else did they put on their agenda?
Separation buyback request.
Yeah, separation buyback request. I want to be clear about that. It's not us to authorize that, but it's sort of the first time there's been a request to utilize the reserve fund that we created a couple of years ago. Again, it's not, we're not empowered to do it, but I think as the first request, it'd be interesting to see what kind of issues did we not anticipate that we might want to address at another time to clarify how the fund is used. So we'll have some discussion around that. And then we'll recess to join the Board of Selectmen for 7 o'clock. There's a presentation of the proposed FY '24 capital improvement plan. We will then recess after the selectmen respond to the proposed changes in the article.
I guess what would be really helpful is if, when the Board of Selectmen, they meet at 6:30, if they can have their vote to recommend before 7 o'clock, and then, I mean, we may be able to just make that
Yeah,
motion right at the table and recess right there.
yeah,
That would be
yeah, if
helpful.
they could address that up front,
Right at the top.
that would be fair for us. All right. So we'll see you all on Monday.
Well, I guess the other thing I just want, if anybody is still persevering and listening out there, I think your attendance at the March 13th town meeting, 7 PM at the high school, is critical, because you've heard the discussion tonight there. It looks like just a very few warrant articles, but they're important.
Yep. Yep.
Motion to adjourn at 8:28.
Second.
Motion to adjourn,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Courts. All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you.